We are here as men of peace, but we are here also to declare our full and forthright support of what is in great measure a military alliance.
But in the background is a much wider and more suggestive question connected with the fact that Canada seems to have moved from a pre-national to a post-national phase of existence without ever having been a nation.
That bigness and complexity are functions not so much of numbers as of ideas.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years we've done it with one signature of a pen. You've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States.
Good evening and welcome to the Red Ensign Special. This is your host, the Black Horse. Tonight we're going to take an opportunity to look at the meeting point of current events, political theory, and Canadian history. "14 years ago, in his now famous, then obscure blog, Unqualified Reservations, Curtis Yarvin wrote an essay heavily paraphrasing Carl Schmitt, in which he made the statement, "Sovereignty is conserved." By that, he meant that in any and every contained domain, there is a sovereign who has a monopoly on both violence and narrative. And encompassed within narrative is the justice system. What is right and force in order to enact what is right. Throughout Canadian history, throughout world history, we have seen what happens when sovereignty is challenged within a state. In October 1970, during the government of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the FLQ kidnapped two members of the Canadian government, one of the provincial government, another of the diplomatic corps, as part of an explicit challenge to the sovereignty of the federal government over Quebec, seeking to create a degree of independence in the country, established on the basis of breaking the state monopoly on both narrative and violence. As we consider the subject today, I want to listen to the words of Pierre Trudeau in response to that crisis.
Sir, what is it with all these men with guns around here?
Haven't you noticed?
Yeah, I've noticed them. Why you people decided to have them?
What's your worry?
I'm not worried, but you
So if
seem
you're
to
not
be.
worried, what's your... I know where
I'm worried about living in a town that's full of people with guns running around in it.
Are you? Have they done anything to you? Have they pushed you around or anything?
They've pushed around friends of mine,
Yeah? What were your friends doing?
trying to take pictures of them.
Aha!
Just an absolutely magnificent clip there. Notice that in the deployment of tens of thousands of troops to the streets of Montreal, Quebec City, and Ottawa, Pierre Trudeau sought not only to reassert Canada's sovereignty over Quebec in the kinetic sense, in other words, to utterly control and dominate the space and dominate any prospect of violence, but he also sought complete and total control of the information space. You can see this played out repeatedly in Canadian history over a principle that this audience is likely to be very unsympathetic to. The Canadian government under Trudeau the Younger identified the truck convoy protest, which I would argue was primarily an attempt to petition government rather than challenge its sovereignty, identified it as a threat to the sovereign's ability to make decisions. And so they invoked the War Measures Act. They made the decision. They used the state's monopoly on violence. They executed mass arrests. They beat the 8 members of the crowd who resisted arrest. They used every mechanism available within the state in order to reestablish a monopoly both on narrative and a monopoly on violence. The minute that a state tolerates a challenge to its legal authority, either a challenge in the realm of information or a challenge in the realm of physical control, that state has divorced itself from a degree of its sovereignty. It has allowed a challenger to assume fractional sovereignty over a part of the state, a process which is the beginning of a genuine challenge to sovereignty. I want to roll one more clip from Trudeau the Elder here at this juncture.
It's my choice, obviously. You know, I think it's more important to get rid of those who are committing violence against the total society and those who are trying to run the government through a parallel power by establishing their authority by kidnapping and blackmail. And I think it's our duty as a government to protect government officials and important people in our society against being used as tools in this blackmail. No, you don't agree to this, but I'm sure that, once again, with hindsight, you would have probably found it preferable if Mr. Cross and Mr. Laporte had been protected from kidnapping, which they weren't, because the steps we're taking now weren't taken. But even with your hindsight, I don't see how you can deny that.
No, I still go back to the choice that you have to make in the kind of society that you live in.
There's a lot of bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed, but it's more important to keep law and order in this society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of a soldier.
At any cost? At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Well, just watch me.
Notice the language. He opens with the idea that the FLQ, in breaking the state's monopoly on violence, is a challenge to the, quote, total society, right? Pierre Trudeau is asserting the total sovereignty of the Canadian government over both the kinetic and information space in that moment of decision. What I want this audience to meditate on this evening is the fact that the act of believing in a political principle, believing in a future for your people, requires you to be able to assert all of the corollary consequences of that idea as it's put into force, right? In other words, before you embark on a political journey, you must ask yourself the question, am I willing to assert sovereignty in back of this principle, knowing that asserting sovereignty requires exercising violence on behalf of the idea, right? Do I believe it so much that I'm willing to allow the state to enforce this at the point of a gun? In Minneapolis today, a fascinating contest for sovereignty is being played out through competing propaganda. You have a physical battle playing out on the streets between ICE, the U.S. Immigration Enforcement Agency, and between well-organized, well-equipped left-wing protesters who we know for a fact have the support, implicit or explicit, of the Minnesota government, and likely the support of a much wider network within the United States. We know, for example, that there are dozens of media outlets, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of media outlets throughout the United States that are willing to pair their attempt to assert physical dominance over the city of Minneapolis with an attempt to assert narrative dominance over what's going on here. Here we have an outlet discussing the fact that ICE clearly killed 2 innocent protesters. That's loaded language, right? You're talking about 2 individuals who to put it in the most neutral possible terms, challenged the sovereignty of a federal law enforcement agency to conduct their business, and did so, one, carrying a gun, brandishing it. Well, brandishing is a legal term. Carrying a gun, another prepared to ram an officer with her car. All right. That's a level of challenge to sovereignty that puts the term innocent protesters into a propaganda framing. You're witnessing a contest for sovereignty between the Trump administration exerting themselves through ICE and through their own media infrastructure, and an alternate pole of sovereignty within the United States. You're looking at a country which, unlike Canada, has chosen to tolerate an active contest for sovereignty within the state. All right, this is an extremely dangerous situation. We have a longtime mutual on Team Red, who is very much a Team Red partisan, here discussing how this is a potential turning point in U.S. history. This sounds hyperbolic, but think about what's going on here. You have the Trump administration being invited to challenge the sovereignty of the legacy apparatus of the American state. So far, the Trump administration has declined the invitation, and yet we have Border Patrol standing up there and saying that they will not be intimidated, etc., making all of those sounds. Understand how dangerous this moment is. Understand how seriously states take threats to their sovereignty. Understand that it is overwhelmingly likely that this contest for sovereignty will close in one of three situations: a border being drawn, or the reassertion of one team or the other of total sovereignty over the kinetic and information space, right? Either Team Blue will reassert sovereignty over the United States in totality and leverage narrative and kinetic control in order to discipline those who dared to challenge their sovereignty. Team Red will grow a pair and assert sovereignty over the entirety of the United States and discipline their enemies using the kinetic apparatus of the state within a narrative apparatus that they control. Or a border will be drawn, and you will have what do they call it in the US? You will have states or subnational entities in which federal law will not be enforced. They call it nullification there. That's what they call it. A permanent division of sovereignty organized by region. In any of these three outcomes, you're going to see a lot of people involved in this altercation caught on one side or the other, right? And again, a moment of decision is coming where the question must be answered: how much do you believe in the future for which you are fighting politically? Do you believe it enough to use the full force of the state to impose that vision on your opponents? Do you believe it enough to be prepared to crush your enemies? And if you don't believe it enough to be prepared to crush your enemies, then it's time to turn back. Because your opponents in that contest for sovereignty certainly believe it. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you'll learn something, and I will be back with you again soon.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations, by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.